Even thousands of years after his reign, Chinese Emperor Qin Shi Huang has left treasures to be discovered in a tomb buried 114 feet underground.
The latest scientific techniques unlock the dark truth about the ancient world's lost superpower.
One emperor of China built an underground world so dangerous that it has stayed sealed for more than 2,000 years.
This is a personal burial complex, 60 square kilometers, which is the equivalent to the size of Manhattan.
His grave was forgotten, ignored, and mistaken for just another hill.
The tomb actually covers a very large area. Only a few areas and surrounding the border part of the tomb complex have been excavated.
When researchers finally confirmed who was buried there, the discovery didn't bring relief. It raised alarms.
They built mechanical traps, rivers of mercury, a kingdom beneath the earth.
Because it points straight to a tomb so risky that even modern experts refuse to go inside. The making of the second emperor of China. In a quiet corner of modern Xi'an, there is a small green mound beside a paved path. The earth rises only about 16 feet, rounded and smooth, with trees leaning over it and apartment blocks showing through the leaves. At the front, there is a gray brick frame holding a black stone slab carved with 6 characters that say, Mausoleum of the Second Emperor of Qin. A few bronze figures nearby show robed officials and a seated ruler. Most people stroll past this little park in the Yanta district without stopping, not realizing that this low hill holds the body of the young emperor who helped lock one of the most dangerous tombs in history. The man under that mound was born Hu Hai. His father, Qin Shi Huang, had spent years crushing rival kingdoms and turning them into a single empire ruled from Xianyang near the Wei River.
What we knew from these early stories, from these legends, was the tale of a person who seemed from those sources to be larger than life.
He standardized money, writing, and weights so that merchants and officials across the new realm used the same systems, and he enforced strict laws with heavy punishment for anyone who stepped out of line. The grand plan was that this new order would last for ages, but one key thing was missing. The first emperor never left a clear final order naming which son should follow him. His oldest son, Fusu, had been treated like the next ruler for years. But when Qin Shi Huang suddenly died while traveling in eastern China, the court was far from the capital, and there was no sealed will that everyone could trust. That silence at the top opened the door for a quiet coup. 2 men close to the dead emperor stepped through that door. One was Li Si, the chancellor who had designed much of Qin's centralized government. The other was Zhao Gao, a sharp and ambitious court official who had tutored Hu Hai in the hard rules of the Qin law code. When Qin Shi Huang died on the road, they feared that announcing his death at once would spark panic and revolt before they could control the succession, so they hid it. The royal carriage was sealed tight, with carts of rotting fish traveling in the same convoy so that any smell from the body could be blamed on the cargo. As the funeral procession slowly made its way back to Xianyang, Li Si and Zhao Gao wrote a fake imperial order. Written as if it came from the living emperor, it ordered Fusu to kill himself, and named the younger son Hu Hai as successor. Fusu obeyed the deadly order. Hu Hai returned to the capital as heir, and soon took the throne name Qin Shi, meaning Second Emperor of Qin. But a crown built on a lie is the easiest one for other people to control. The fall of the Second Emperor of China. From his first day on the throne, Qin Shi depended on the men who had put him there.
How could such an enormous historical personage exist?
As emperor, he leaned heavily on Li Si for state business and on Zhao Gao for everything that passed through the palace. The emperor was rarely seen in public. Ministers could not speak to him directly unless Zhao Gao was present, and even written reports reached him only after Zhao Gao had checked them. The person steering the empire was the tutor standing beside the throne, not the nervous young man wearing the crown. Outside the palace, the Qin system kept running, still enforcing the same harsh laws created by the first emperor. The legal system was simple and brutal: clear orders from above, strict obedience below, and heavy punishment for anyone who failed. Officials continued to pull taxes, grain, and labor from peasants to feed huge state projects. Workers were driven to extend great defensive walls in the north and to build grand palaces near the capital. Another constant burden was the vast burial complex east of Xianyang at the foot of Mount Li, where Qin Shi Huang had ordered a huge underground city for his own afterlife. After taking power, Qin Shi kept sending workers and supplies to the site, forcing the project forward even as the rest of the empire started to strain. The first clear break in that system came from the lowest ranks. About a year after Qin Ershi became emperor, two junior officers named Chen Sheng and Wu Guang were ordered to lead a group of forced laborers to a distant post. Heavy rain turned the roads into mud and slowed the group. Under Qin law, arriving late in wartime could mean execution, no matter the excuse. Facing almost certain death for coming late, they chose rebellion. At a place later known as Da Zexiang, they raised their own banner, called farmers and soldiers to join them, and claimed to fight against the cruelty of the Qin court. Their uprising was quickly joined by others. In many regions, desperate locals saw that the mighty empire could be challenged and began to copy the idea. Within a short time, unrest spread across large parts of the realm. Former Qin generals and local leaders used the chaos to build their own forces. Two of the most important were Xiang Yu from the old state of Chu and Liu Bang from Pei, men who began as regional leaders and then used each success to pull more fighters to their side. Technically, Qin still commanded the largest armies, but its leaders were no longer united. The more local officials squeezed people for taxes and forced labor to keep old projects running, the more villages openly rebelled. It became a downward spiral that the young emperor didn't know how to stop. Inside the palace, the information he needed to make good choices was also breaking down. Qin Ershi responded badly to bad news. Messengers and officials who brought reports of defeat risked losing rank, property, or even their lives. Zhao Gao understood this weakness and started to control what the emperor heard. He delayed or softened reports from the front and punished those who tried to tell the full truth. One famous case involves the Battle of Julu, where a huge Qin army sent to crush part of the Chu rebellion was destroyed. Hundreds of thousands of Qin soldiers were killed or captured in that campaign, but the emperor did not learn the full scale of the loss at once because those closest to him hid it in fear. When a more honest courtier finally told him how badly the war was going, Qin Ershi exploded in anger and talked about punishing Zhao Gao for misleading him. By then, Zhao Gao had already cut down most of the people who might have protected the throne. The famous general Meng Tian and his brother Meng Yi, long trusted by the first emperor, were removed and killed after being accused of treason. Li Si, who had once stood at Zhao Gao's side when they forged the fatal decree, was arrested on doubtful charges, tortured, and executed along with his family. To tighten his control over the court, Zhao Gao carried out a disturbing test. He led a live deer into the hall, pointed at it, and called it a horse. When the emperor questioned this, Zhao Gao asked the officials what animal they saw. Those who agreed it was a horse were rewarded. Those who said it was a deer were quietly marked and later eliminated. After that, almost no one in the palace dared to challenge him. As rebel forces pressed closer to the Qin heartland, Qin Ershi's world shrank to the palaces and to the polished reports Zhao Gao allowed him to see. Around 207 before the Common Era, Zhao Gao made his final move. He sent troops to surround the emperor at a palace near Xianyang, accused him of ruining the state through weakness, and forced him to take his own life. The second emperor of Qin had been on the throne for only about 3 years. With him gone, Zhao Gao placed a new figure, Ziying, on the throne. But the title changed. Ziying was now called King of Qin rather than Emperor because so much of the wider empire had already slipped away. Ziying soon realized that the greatest threat inside the capital was Zhao Gao himself. He organized a plot, lured the eunuch into a trap, and had him killed. But events outside the palace were moving too fast to stop. Rebel troops under Liu Bang pushed through the mountain passes and reached Xianyang. Ziying surrendered the city and handed over the imperial seals, hoping to save lives. Not long after, Xiang Yu arrived with his own army, killed Ziying, stripped the palaces of their treasures, and burned many of the great buildings the first emperor had raised. The Qin dynasty, which had unified China and spoken of ruling for ages, had lasted for only about 15 years from unification to collapse. For Qin Ershi, the final verdict was unforgiving. Han Dynasty historians and many later scholars described him as a weak and easily led ruler who allowed a harsh system to spin into total disaster. He was remembered as cruel when he listened to hardline advice and helpless when he faced real crises. Unlike many earlier kings, he never received a respectful temple name after death. Most records simply call him Second Emperor of Qin and move on. That judgment showed up in the way his body was treated. While his father rested under a huge earth mound near Mount Li, surrounded by a walled necropolis, Qin Ershi's grave was more like a commoner's tomb. Over the centuries that followed, that small mound faded into the background of the landscape south of Xi'an. New dynasties buried their own rulers on other hills. Farmers plowed fields and built houses around older graves. Villages like Xikjiang grew on the city's edge. The low rise that covered Qin Ershi's coffin blended with other unnamed mounds. There was no long sacred road, no line of stone beasts, and no steady stream of visitors to keep his story alive. For many locals, it was simply an old grave on a shaded slope. Things changed in the middle of the 20th century, when teams from the Shanxi Cultural Relics Office began to map and register ancient sites around Xi'an. In the 1950s, they walked the fields, noted the position and shape of surviving mounds, and compared them with early texts that listed where the Qin and later dynasties had placed their tombs. This rounded mound on the southern side of Shijiang village, near what is now Qinan Road in the Kujiang area, matched the traditional descriptions for the second emperor's resting place. On that basis, officials recorded it as the tomb of Qin Shi and added it to their protected lists. In the decades that followed, city planners reshaped the spot as a small park instead of clearing it for new buildings. The earth mound was left in place, paths were laid around it, and more trees were planted. A stone stele with the title Mausoleum of the Second Emperor of Qin was set north of the hill, and sculpted figures were added nearby to show scenes from the short Qin Empire so that visitors could link the quiet hill with the past. There is one last turn here. The same young ruler whose body lies under that low hill helped lock away one of the largest and most mysterious tombs in the world. After Qin Shi Huang was laid to rest under his great mound near Mount Li, the second emperor ordered the inner passageways and doors sealed. Workers and specialists who knew the hidden routes were trapped or killed so that no one else could use their knowledge.
The designers, the architects, the engineers, and builders of the tomb, all those who know the way in and out, will be forced to stay.
Trees and grass were planted across the mound until it looked like a natural hill. Today, anyone can walk up to the stele over Qin Shi's own grave in Yanta and know exactly where his bones lie. The real fear hangs over the much larger mound he helped finish nearby, the one that still keeps its chambers closed and makes even modern explorers hesitate at the thought of going in. The most dangerous tomb in China. The biggest royal tomb in China still sits sealed under a tree-covered hill outside the city of Xi'an. From the road, it looks like a low, even pyramid, rising a little over 150 feet above the plain, with paths, trees, and a museum for visitors. Under that hill, somewhere inside an underground palace as big as several city blocks, lies the coffin of the first emperor of Qin. The chamber has never been opened, even though the tomb was finished more than 2,000 years ago. What makes this mound stand out is not only its size, but the way it has stayed completely closed while the world around it changed. Other royal graves in China have been looted, dug up by archaeologists, or damaged by war and politics. Here, the central chamber is still sealed. Only the outer parts of the huge tomb area around it, including the famous pits of clay soldiers, have been explored. The main written plan for what is under the hill comes from a court historian named Sima Qian, who was writing about a century after the first emperor died. In his history, he says that workers dug deep into the ground and built a full palace beneath the hill. They filled it with rare objects, set up models of towers and halls, and then added defenses. He writes that craftspeople built crossbows and arrows and left them pointed at any future intruder. Beneath the floor, he says they poured rivers and seas of liquid mercury to stand in for the great waterways of China, and above, they painted a sky full of stars on the ceiling.
Sima Qian's vivid description details his bronze coffin circled by 100 mercury rivers and seas.
For a long time, people argued about how much of that description was real and how much was story. The basic idea matches what the emperor did in life. He was the ruler who turned scattered kingdoms into one empire and wanted that empire to follow him into death. The hill was not meant to be just a grave. It was built to hold a copy of his world and to shut that world away from everyone else. Mercury is one of the key reasons this place still worries experts. It is a silvery, heavy metal that is liquid at room temperature. Old Chinese doctors and alchemists believed it could keep the body from decaying and even help people live longer, so they used it in pills and drinks for the rich. Many historians now believe the first emperor may have died young, partly because he took mercury mixtures that were given to him as medicine. If someone who ingested it regularly in life was willing to flood his tomb with it in death, it shows just how central this substance was to his belief in power and immortality. Sima Qian's claim about rivers and seas of mercury sounded wild for centuries. There was no way to check what was inside the hill without destroying it. That changed when scientists started testing the ground around the mound. Soil samples taken on and near the hill show that the earth above the tomb holds unusually high amounts of mercury compared with normal soil in the area. One study found that one spot on the mound had about 1,400 parts per billion of mercury, while more than 50 other sample points averaged around 200 parts per billion. Those are not small bumps. They are spikes that strongly point to a large buried source of mercury under the hill.
Modern scientific studies have detected high levels of mercury around the tomb.
Later work looked not only at the soil, but also at the air over and around the mound. A team measured mercury gas above the hill and compared it to the background air in the same region. They found that normal air pollution in the area gave readings of about 5 to 10 nanograms of mercury per cubic meter. Over the mound itself, they picked up patches that reached roughly 20 to 27 nanograms per cubic meter. Using those numbers and the size of the plume, they estimated that at least about 1 ton of mercury has already slowly leaked into the air since the tomb was sealed. That also suggests that even more mercury is still trapped inside. That's why explorers are afraid to enter the underground chamber. In a confined space, liquid mercury slowly turns into gas that lingers in the air. If someone breathes that gas at high levels, it can damage their brain, nerves, and kidneys. It can make them shake, lose their memory, and suffer long-term health problems. Even with modern protective suits and masks, a room full of mercury vapor would be a dangerous place to work. On top of that, if a large hidden pool of mercury is suddenly cracked or spilled during digging, it could soak into the soil and spread into groundwater. That is why scientists and officials worry not just about the team that would go in, but also about the farms, homes, and rivers around the site. Mercury is only part of the physical danger. The tomb's defensive design adds another layer of risk. Sima Qian says crossbows were set up inside, with arrows ready to fire at anyone who forced their way in. The wood and leather parts of such devices will have decayed over 2,000 years, but no one knows how the metal parts, heavy stones, or other parts of the mechanism have shifted. A worker breaking through a wall could easily trigger a fall of debris or a sudden collapse, not because the ancient trap still works as planned, but because it fails in some unexpected way. There is also the simple engineering problem of the hill itself. Studies of the site suggest that the main underground room is very tall, on the order of 100 feet or more from floor to ceiling, surrounded by massive earth walls and capped by layers of packed soil and brick. That structure has survived earthquakes, changes in water levels, and the slow settling of the ground since around the 3rd century before the Common Era. Cutting a new tunnel or shaft into that kind of space is like drilling into the side of a giant, old dam. One wrong move can change how the weight is carried and cause parts of the roof or walls to crack or fall, crushing whatever has been preserved inside. Even if no one is hurt and the structure does not cave in, opening the room would still start a second kind of slow disaster, the decay of fragile objects that have been sealed for more than 20 centuries. Many of the most valuable things in such a tomb are not bronze or stone, which can survive exposure if handled well, but materials like silk, lacquered wood, painted surfaces, and paper-thin gold foil. At the nearby pits of clay soldiers, conservators saw the bright paints on the statues start to curl in seconds and flake off in minutes once they hit open air, before they developed better ways to slow that damage. Inside the main tomb, there could be murals, wooden structures, and fabrics that would react even more violently to a sudden change in air, light, and moisture. China already has one painful example of how badly things can go when a royal tomb is opened without the right tools. In the 1950s, archaeologists dug into Dingling, the tomb of the Wanli Emperor of the Ming Dynasty, near Beijing. It was the first and only time in the People's Republic era that they fully opened a major imperial underground palace. Crews removed the heavy stone slabs, lifted out nested coffins, and brought up large numbers of silk robes, lacquered wood, documents, and other grave goods. At first, the find was celebrated as a huge success. The celebration did not last. Conservation methods were still very basic at that time. Many items from the tomb were stored in rooms that did not control temperature or humidity. Some were simply piled in boxes or on shelves. As air and moisture swung back and forth, silk garments cracked and turned to dust. Wooden and lacquered pieces warped and peeled, and paints lost their color. Then a second blow hit. During the Cultural Revolution in the 1960s, radical groups saw royal tombs and museums as symbols of an old order that needed to be smashed. Dingling, which was now wide open and full of exposed relics, became an easy target. Red Guard groups broke into the site, dragged out the coffins, destroyed the remains of the emperor and his empresses, and damaged or destroyed many of the objects that had survived the first wave of decay. A leading scholar who had supported the excavation was publicly attacked and later died in prison. The tomb that had once seemed like a proud national project turned into a symbol of loss and regret. Out of that disaster came a new way of thinking. Chinese cultural authorities and archaeologists slowly agreed that opening unopened imperial tombs should be the rare exception, not the rule. Policies were tightened so that full excavation would only be allowed in rescue situations, such as when a site was being destroyed by new construction or natural damage. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.